Don Juan began to walk into the desert chaparral. He signaled me with his head to follow him. I could have walked to my car and left, except I liked to roam in that beautiful desert with him. I liked the sensation, which I experienced only in his company, that this was indeed an awesome, mysterious, yet beautiful world, and as he had said, I was hooked. Don Juan led me to the hills toward the east. It was a long hike. It was a hot day. The heat, however, which ordinarily would have been unbearable to me, was somehow unnoticeable. We walked for quite a distance into the canyon, until Don Juan came to a halt and sat down in the shade of some boulders. I took some crackers out of my knapsack, but he told me not to bother with them. He said that I should sit in a prominent place. He pointed to a single, almost round boulder 10 or 15 feet away and helped me climb to the top. I thought he was also going to sit there, but instead he just climbed part of the way in order to hand me some pieces of dry meat. He told me with a deadly serious expression that it was power meat and should be chewed very slowly and should not be mixed with any other food. He then walked back to the shaded area and sat down with his back against a rock. He seemed relaxed, almost sleepy. He remained in that position until I had finished eating. Then he sat up straight and tilted his head to the right. He seemed to be listening attentively. He glanced at me 2 or 3 times, stood up abruptly, and began to scan the surrounding areas with his eyes, the way a hunter would do. I automatically froze on the spot and only moved my eyes in order to follow his movements. Very carefully, he stepped behind some rocks, as if he were expecting game to come into the area of which we were. I realized then that we were in a round, cove-like bend in the dry water canyon, surrounded by sandstone boulders. Don Juan suddenly came out from behind the rocks and smiled at me. He stretched his arms, yawned, and walked toward the boulder where I was. I relaxed my tense posture and sat down. "What happened?" I asked in a whisper. He answered me, yelling, "There's nothing around here to worry about." I felt an immediate jolt in my stomach. His answer was inappropriate, and it was inconceivable to me that he would yell unless he had a specific reason for it. I began to slide down from the boulder, but he yelled that I should stay there a while longer. "What are you doing?" He sat down and concealed himself between 2 rocks at the base of the boulder where I was, and then he said in a very loud voice that he had only been looking around because he thought he heard something. "I was looking around because I thought I heard something." I asked if he heard a large animal. He put his hand to his ear and yelled that he was unable to hear me and I should shout my words. I felt ill at ease yelling, but he urged me in a loud voice to speak up. I shouted that I wanted to know what was going on, and he shouted back that there's really nothing going on around here. He yelled, asking if I could see anything from the top of the boulder. I said, "No," and he asked me to describe the terrain toward the south. We shouted back and forth for a while, and then he signaled me to come down. I joined him, and he whispered in my ear that yelling was necessary to make our presence known, because I had to make myself accessible to the power of that specific waterhole. I looked around, but I could not see the waterhole. He pointed out that we were standing on it. "There's water here, and also power. There's a spirit here, and we have to lure it out. Perhaps it will come after you." I wanted to know more about the alleged spirit, but he insisted on total silence. He advised me to stay perfectly still and not let out a whisper or make the slightest movement to betray our presence. Apparently, it was easy for him to remain in complete immobility for hours. For me, however, it was sheer torture. My legs fell asleep, my back ached, and the tension built up around my neck and shoulders. My entire body became numb and cold. I was in great discomfort when Don Juan finally stood up. He just sprung to his feet and extended his hand to me and helped me up. As I was trying to stretch my legs, I realized the inconceivable easiness with which Don Juan had jumped up after hours of immobility. It took quite some time for my muscles to regain the elasticity needed for walking. Don Juan headed back for the house. He walked extremely slowly. He set up a length of 3 paces as the distance I should follow him. He meandered around the regular route and crossed it 4 or 5 times in different directions. When we finally arrived at his house, it was late afternoon. I tried to question him about the events of the day. He explained that talking was unnecessary. For the time being, I had to refrain from asking questions until we were in a place of power. I was dying to know what he meant by that, and tried to whisper a question, but he reminded me, with a cold, severe look, that he meant business. We sat on his porch for hours. I worked on my notes. From time to time, he handed me a piece of dry meat. Finally, it was too dark to write. I tried to think about the new developments, but some part of myself refused to, and I fell asleep.